This is the podcast, Playing Above the Line, where we get into the details of what it is that's made entrepreneurs and business leaders successful. Hi, I'm Dennis Sharon, and I'm a business leader with Hartman, Blackman, and Kilgore. I've been the managing shareholder of HB&K for many years and have worked with local businesses to learn what makes them successful throughout their career.
And I'm Alan Cave. I'm also a shareholder at HB&K, a full-service accounting and business consulting firm. During our careers, Dennis and I have both been fortunate to work with many successful businesses and their owners, as well as other leaders throughout the accounting profession and beyond. We're happy to share some of their stories with you.
Today, we're joined by Rick Miller. Rick has over 30 years' experience working in both public and private companies in financial, operational, and administrative roles. Rick is the founder of Pro365 Consulting, which provides executive coaching and helps organizations improve productivity and increase profitability. Most recently, Rick helped open Hatch, Fairhope, Alabama, which is a resource hub for technology-based entrepreneurs in Baldwin County. Today, Rick talks to us about his path, his methodology, and leadership style, and how it's done a 180, and now how he focuses on people, building relationships, and focusing on their strengths.
Rick Miller, thanks for being here today.
Hey, my pleasure.
Yeah, you made the trip across the bay to join us. So tell us what you're doing. You're doing a lot, and you've done a lot, but tell us your latest venture with Hatch Fairhope.
Well, I'm the luckiest person in this room right now because I got asked about 5-6 months ago to help bring up a small town business incubator, and in Fairhope we call it Hatch. It's part of a statewide network of technology villages where we're trying to put incubators into towns under 50,000. And so Fairhope, Coleman, and a few others have been selected, and we're connected to the University of Alabama's research capabilities and databases. So it's kind of the 21st century idea that I think I feel very fortunate to be part of.
And you mentioned technology incubator, so expand more on what that focus is going to be with Hatch.
Well, what Hatch is focused on, as opposed to, let's say, small business development centers and SCORE and other organizations that are there to help businesses get launched, is we want to focus on high tech. And the reason being is just pure economics. High tech basically pays about twice as much as the average Alabamian makes, which is about $35,000 a year. The average tech job in Alabama is over $70,000 a year. So that's one reason. Wow. The other reason is technology is clean. When Fairhope in our Eastern Shore community is known for the quality of life. And so we can bring in jobs that can both improve the economics and maintain the environment at the same time. So put those two together along with the number of industries that are moving into our area, and they use technology, so that it seems like it's a good time to try to attract entrepreneurs into this area.
Yeah. Rick, I've known you for many years, and sons played soccer together. It seemed like a lot of my relationships are through that. But share a little bit about your history, because you've done so much in very little time. We're all of those ages, but that's very little time. But tell us more.
Well, I'll give you a background, because it's funny when you're talking about Alan coming across the bay. I grew up in Mobile. And was fortunate enough to go to Alabama because my dad basically said, you can go to any school you want to, but I'll pay for Alabama. And got up there, and the first course I actually made an A in was accounting. So I ended up with an accounting degree from there. And there was a mentor there who ran an international exchange program, Dean Garner, who was a retired dean of the business school, who became my first, probably my best mentor. And he encouraged me to go out and see the world. So I graduated with an accounting degree and head to New York and worked for a Big 8 CPA firm back when there were 8 of them. And never got overseas, which was my goal to go in there. But it got me exposed to the fact that being from the South, you could compete with other parts of the country, because if you don't know, when you just live and grow up here, you don't know how good we really have it,
right?
In terms of abilities. And so that got me to a position where I got accepted to Harvard, got an MBA there, and continued my desire to see the world. So rather than going to Europe, I ended up going out to San Francisco and working there. Involved with a couple of growth companies, started my own consulting business, and ended up marrying a girl from Mobile who'd moved out west and had a child who we we know as Sam around here, but that gave us a reason to move back here. So 25 years ago, having been out west and been involved with venture starting, funding, and different things, I moved back to Fairhope to try to make sure that my son grew up knowing the rest of his family. After that, kind of being here, I discovered that the best thing for me was to be a consultant because I'd done a lot of different things, worked in service industries, worked in a little bit of high tech with a venture capital firm out west, and would go back and forth for a long time. As what Dennis alluded to was I'd do some consulting. Somebody would say, well, why don't you be our CFO? Because that was really my career path up to moving back here. I'd do that for a while, and I would discover something that I'm old enough to where they didn't diagnose, and that's ADD. I am probably the worst accounting graduate CPA you know, because I'll do something for 2 or 3 years and then say, okay, I'm bored. I need to do something else, which usually leads to either I do something stupid or I discover another opportunity. So that's led me to a position where I've been fortunate to find a lot of different opportunities to help people grow their companies. And that's kind of how, in the course of getting here, I've been just kind of oil spill happens. They need somebody to run a business support center. I get an opportunity to do that. The SBA brings in a course to help emerging companies grow. I got asked to facilitate that. And then, last year, Lee calls me and said, we're bringing up this high-tech incubator. Would you be interested in helping run it? So I say that because I consider myself very fortunate given the fact that I know how ADD I really am.
Yeah, so obviously, so you have done a lot. Dennis is right in that respect. So obviously, in those positions that you've held and those people that you've met, you've seen a lot of different qualities in people and leaders, some good, some bad. But can you pinpoint one or two maybe that have impressed you throughout your career as this is really a great leadership quality that I have recognized as common throughout my relationships and that kind of thing?
Yeah, maybe the best one I've seen in a lot of ways, everybody knows of him, is John Maxwell, because I've followed his career long enough to see that he figured out what servant leadership's all about. And the people that have influenced me the most have been the most humble, that have basically said that leadership is all about servanthood. And so I can't say there's any one individual I've worked for, but I know I'm attracted to people that understand that. The reason I think of Maxwell is one of the hardest leadership positions you can have is voluntary organizations, because you've got to influence people. So you look in a church, for instance, or nonprofits, but really in a church, primarily those people are trying to get volunteers to do things. You see it in the Boy Scouts, I know. If you want to hone your leadership skills, do it in a position where you have to influence people to volunteer to do something, and it will very quickly show you where you need to improve.
Yeah, that's great. And I know servant leadership has always been a thing you've talked about. And so, what's the favorite thing you get to do? I mean, just there's so many things. It's probably not one, but for guys like us that have stayed in a profession for a long time, get to do a lot of different things, this kind of fun stuff. But to have had all those experiences over time, you obviously have found some things that were really fun. Even though you got bored with them, they were really fun.
I've been able to take a bad habit and turn it into a paying career. And let me just explain, because there is something I do now that I love to do, and that is facilitate ideas. I, along the way, got interested in Gallup because in working with companies, I found their research on employee engagement is world-class, and I studied it. I went and took some courses on high-energy employee engagement facilitation, and what I found was they give you a strength-based, and I believe that the best thing you can do in management is to focus on people's strengths. I went through their program to learn how to do that, and my strengths have to do with strategy and ideation and connection. Those are 3 of my top 5. So when I'm able to do corporate retreats or teach that emerging leaders, or even sit around with an entrepreneur that comes into Hatch and we're playing with ideas, I'm truly playing. I mean, it is fun. And it's just something that I'm grateful that those are my skill sets and I'm able to do it. So, You put me in, we did a session with HB&K where Chris Klinger and I were talking to, a Google Hangout with several of your offices about, I forget the topic, but I know that, that was fun. I didn't know I was working. I was just having fun listening to ideas and bouncing around. So that's kind of, to me, the fact that I get to do that, I just wake up saying thank you.
Yeah, and that's great, and you're lucky to be able to do that. So in your position with Hatch, obviously you deal with entrepreneurs day in and day out. So what strikes you about the people that you've been able to deal with as far as their work ethic or their drive or their vision? All entrepreneurs have those things in common. So what has that kind of looked like for you over the past year or so?
What I've seen is they have the ability to see outside the box. And of course, as a consultant, I try to tell most companies you need to get better being in the box. Run the off-tackle play until you can run it well before you try to add the jet sweep, so to speak. But with entrepreneurs that come into that, they have an idea that just it's in their DNA. They think about it. They're so focused. They may not see that somebody else is doing it, but to them, it's this great new out of the box. I've got a better way to do something, and that's fun. What we try to do is to bring it back in to make sure there's a market for it, that there's not somebody who's already in that space with a patent that's going to knock down their idea. But the passion that they have about the idea and the fact that most of them don't take no. I mean, some of them do, but most of them come in there with the idea, how can you help me? I've got something that's going to work, and that's contagious.
You have a wonderful, brilliant entrepreneur that comes in, locates within Hatch and all that. What would be your ultimate perfect scenario for that entrepreneur, say 3, 4, 5 years down the road?
Let me give you where I hope they would be, and then we'll back into how we help them get there.
Right.
They've got a manufacturing plant here. They're assembling something. They're selling it at least nationally, if not internationally. They're employing 15 to 30 people. They have been venture funded, and they think if they can scale up one more level, they might be able to do an IPO. Mm-hmm. Now, how do we get them there? We have a person that came in, for instance, who spent 30 years in the aerospace industry, started out as an airline mechanic, worked his way up to where he built 787s for Boeings. Okay, knows what he's doing, been in it for 30 years, has a company that staffs MRO companies. He's got a patented idea that he thinks, having worked on planes, this will solve one of their major problems, which are fires on planes that are flying from here to Singapore, those type of long hauls. He's filed his patent. He's got it. So we want to help him figure out how do we get this patent and get a prototype done. We connect him with the University of Alabama's Office of Technology Development. He likes it. We find out there's an engineer up there who's working on a similar type of technology patent, but he's working in the automotive space, not the airline. We get those two together. They drive up to Tuscaloosa a week ago. They like what they're doing. They see some grants they can do. We come back and we start working on finding some seed money and working through a business canvas, putting together a pitch for them to get some seed money to build a prototype. We then try to connect them with several of the aerospace companies here, with the people that we know, and say, okay, we want you to do some proof of concept with them. If it goes, then he goes around. We've already connected him with Lee Lawson, our boss, who's going to find a site for him. He gets proof of concepts, gets funding, builds a prototype, gets somebody to trial it for a while. Then he goes into scaling up, getting more money to actually start building. And that would be the ideal scenario that's already underway here.
That's great. That's great. So you, circling back to the fact that you've done a lot and seen a lot, and working with these young guys, some may be young, some maybe not. But so if you could go back and give 21-year-old Rick Miller, who's a student at the University of Alabama, one piece of advice based on all of your experiences over the 30 years that you've been doing so much, what would that be?
I'll pause on that one because that's a good question.
Did I throw you a curveball? I didn't mean to.
No. It's such a good question. I don't want to blow it. What I would say is spend some time figuring out who you are and what your passions are and what your gifts are. I ended up becoming a CPA because it was the first course I made an A in. Okay, I'm good with numbers. It took me 30 years to figure out because I never knew what a DISC profile or Myers-Briggs or any of those were, that my strengths are dealing with people. Okay. If I'd have known that, I probably would have taken a different path. I followed a path, nothing wrong with it. I was just putting my ladder on the wrong wall. And so that's why when I say I'm ADD, part of it was I just looked at the task and said, okay, if I got an A in a course, and, trust me, I have nothing but respect for what you guys do, because I passed the CPA exam and said if I ever have to take that again, I quit.
But yeah, same here.
Yeah, me too, by the way.
So that said, if I were giving myself advice, I would say spend some more time figuring out who you are, where your gifts are, and go after those, and don't worry about the money.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and I'm going to play that answer for my 18-year-old son who's in his first year of college now, by the way. That's a great answer.
And Rick, I was sitting there pulling up on my phone. You just talked about StrengthsFinder, and I have my top 5 here: futuristic, ideation, individualization, arranger, and deliberative. And that's not an accountant.
No.
And I went into accounting, because I'm heard that some guy that was a CPA in Fairhope many years ago got paid $75 an hour. I just didn't understand the economics of what that meant. But what I found over time is that it did prepare me a lot to be able to do most anything. But that part about understanding yourself, I wish I had known it at 21. That's a great point, because as I've learned more about, like with StrengthsFinders, or we use Colby, which talks about natural habits and things like that. It's so, for me, it's so enlightening. I call it a freeing experience. And so it sounds like for you, one, I think you figured it out a little quicker than I have, but it sounds like that same thing for you. So I appreciate that advice for others and all that. So we sit here and chat some more and all of that. As you look over time, you obviously, with everything you've done, you've observed a lot of people, a lot of different leadership styles, a lot of ways that, say, mentors coached others and all that. How has your view on leadership probably changed over the last some odd number of years? Just to throw out a big, broad, wide question for you.
Okay, how much time do we have? I laugh because I've gone 180 degrees at least. And I say that, and I hope I don't go any further, because that means I'm circling back around to what I started with, and that would be a mistake. Because I'm graduated in the early 70s from college, I was brought up under the traditional management structure of a hierarchy. And, I'll kind of elaborate, but the end of the story is I flip the pyramid whenever I do work with companies. Mm-hmm. And that because I was brought up thinking, okay, my job as an employee is to serve the person I work for, and they have power over me, and their job is to tell me how I'm doing and all of that. So over time, what I've figured out is that leads to people becoming very task-oriented and not people-oriented. And where I've shifted, if you have to say, the difference is I now focus more on the people, and that still leads to the mission. Mm-hmm. The mission hadn't changed, but the way you get there, it used to be task, and now it's more, to me, help the people find their strengths and work with that, and make sure they still fit. Because I don't think just because you believe in people and their strengths doesn't mean that they're always in the right seat. So most of what I'm doing is trying to align people, and then realizing that what Gallup has taught me about management is when people believe that you honestly care about them as a person, they'll stay beyond whatever you pay them, because they're motivated by the fact they're looking for a connection. Now, here's the funny part of this for me. When I was running 25 women at CFO of a medical practice, and so I had the billing office, and I would hire people in there for coding, and I'd say, when you come in here, we can train you to do the task. We can show you, we'll support you. But the one thing when you open that door and come in here, you got to leave whatever problems you have behind, because I can't stand a bad attitude. Was I stupid? I mean, I look at that, and now I realize you can't separate the fact that you're having a bad day at home, that your kid's sick or something like that. You can't just open the door and walk in and say, okay, put that in a compartment. And so what I've looked at is you've got to figure out how to look at people as whole people, understand that. And when they think that, and they know in their gut that you really care about them as a person, In other words, I'm here to help you be the best you can be. And if that means you're leaving the firm, then I'm going to help you leave the firm because I'm going to be better. The irony is they'll stay. They'll stay because they can't find any place where people care about them as much.
Right.
So that's my management style change that I'm now much more focused on. What are their strengths? What's the mission? How do we align them? And if we don't have them, if they have the values of the company, how do we keep them? If they don't have the values and they're in the wrong seat, how do we gracefully and humanely get them out of the organization?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's great insight. And, I could sit here and listen to you talk all day about that kind of stuff because that is outstanding.
Yeah,
but
really
as we wrap up, a couple of questions we always ask our guests, just kind of a couple of fun things. So what are you reading right now? Or if you're not reading anything, what's a book or two that you read throughout your career that's really made an impact on you?
The latest book I'm reading, I'm literally trying to give this away to everybody, is, I'm lost on the title, Never Settle in the Middle. And it's by a guy named Chris Voss. It's on negotiating. This guy was the counterterrorist lead FBI negotiator for 30 years. And it's basically on how to negotiate. And it's a wonderful book on how to deal with situations. And I've already used it in the last day. And I showed it to my wife about, look, I said, use the one-line sentence that he recommended about halfway through the book, and it worked. I got a response, and I've been waiting for 4 weeks for somebody to email and never come back. I got the response in an hour.
That's great. I'm getting that book today.
Yep.
And the other thing is, if we opened your iPhone, Android, if we went to the presets on your car, what do we find that you're listening to these days?
Wharton Knowledge, a podcast.
Okay.
Now, and the other thing you'd probably find me is, if you opened up my phone, you'd see that I'm always going to my daily Bible verse. Mm-hmm. I'm putting it on a sunset, and I'm posting it in Facebook every day. Because the other book that I was going to say that I read every day is Proverbs. Today's the 16th. I read Proverbs 16th because I find every day there's some knowledge in there that I forgot, that I know I've read it before, but it still kind of hits me.
Outstanding stuff. Rick Miller, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Rick.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Dennis, Rick had so much great stuff today. It was unbelievable. But the one thing that stood out to me, and it's kind of what you and I talked about in the first episode, but, servant leadership, and the fact that in order to be a good leader, you have to be first a follower and a servant. I thought that was absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, Rick's got so much experience and has done so many things in his life. I sort of take away that, he talked about that he would get bored with things, but I think what Rick's always done is found new ventures and has somehow always through everything been very positive. And that's the thing about Rick. He's positive every day, and it came out today in the conversation with everything we did. Just a fun day. And folks, if you want to learn more about Rick Miller, you can follow him on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Pro365Rick. Well, thanks for listening to our podcast today. To never miss an episode, subscribe to Playing Above the Line at iTunes and anywhere else you get your podcast. And be sure to leave us a rating. We'd love to know what you think about our show.
To contact us or to stay connected, follow us on social media at HBKCPAS on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.